Section 4. Operating a pistol.
Now I'd like to talk to you about the loading, firing, and unloading procedures of the single-action revolver, the double-action revolver, and semi-automatic pistols. First, I'm going to use this Ruger .22 caliber revolver single-action. It has a loading gate located on the right side of the firearm, which is just next to the rotating cylinder. I can take a round and drop it into the individual chamber, rotate the cylinder, exposing the next open chamber to drop the next round, and so on until I have the firearm completely loaded. I'm always careful also at this time to keep the gun pointed in a safe direction and my finger off the trigger. Once this is loaded, I can close the loading gate, rotate the cylinder slightly to lock it into place, and I can now fire the firearm. When you're completed firing the gun, I'm going to show you how to remove the empty cartridges. With the ramrod located at the end of the barrel, you'll line the cartridge up with the ramrod and simply push it through, and it'll eject the spent cartridge. When you're finished with this, you want to always rotate through each cylinder and check and make sure all 6 chambers are empty. And while you're doing this still, the firearm is pointed in a safe direction and finger off the trigger. Once I see that all the chambers are empty, I can close the loading gate, lock the cylinder back in place, and the firearm is ready for storage. Next, I'll demonstrate the double-action revolver, and for that I'm going to use this Smith & Wesson .357. I'm going to open the cylinder by operating the cylinder release latch. Once the cylinder is open, I can hold the firearm in my right hand, pick up my rounds with my left hand, and again, finger off the trigger, firearm pointed in a safe direction, and I can simply insert each of the cartridges into the empty chambers. Once I've done this, I can close the cylinder, keeping my finger off the trigger, point the gun in the safe direction, and fire the firearm. And if you remember, since this is double action, the firearm operates by simply pulling the trigger or manually cocking the hammer back. If you decide at this point that you don't want to fire the rounds that have been loaded into the firearm, I'm going to demonstrate at this time how to take the rounds out. Again, you work the cylinder release, open the cylinder. With the cylinder plunger located in front of the cylinder, turn the firearm upside down, and the cartridges will be ejected. Some spent cartridges you'll have to manually push the plunger down. They may not come out as easily. You'll physically inspect each chamber to make sure the firearm is unloaded, close the chamber, lock it in place, and the firearm is ready for storage. Now I'll demonstrate on the semi-automatic. For that, I'm going to use this Glock Model 19 9mm. I'm going to take the spring-loaded magazine. I'm going to firmly place each cartridge into the magazine, making sure it's pushed back all the way and seated properly. Once I've done this, keeping the firearm in a safe direction, finger off the trigger, I'm going to insert the spring-loaded magazine into the firearm, pushing it firmly, finger off the trigger. I'm going to pull the slide back and let it go. The firearm is now ready to be fired. At this time, I'll demonstrate on how to unload the firearm. Again, in a safe direction, finger off the trigger, I'm going to operate the magazine release, drop in the magazine. I'm going to pull the slide back and eject the cartridge. Keeping it in a safe direction still, I'm going to lock the slide back, and then I can visually inspect to make sure the firearm is unloaded. The firearm is now ready for transportation or storage. Next, I'd like to demonstrate with a semi-automatic that's equipped with a decocking and a safety device. I'm going to use this Walther PPK 380, which was also popularized in the James Bond movies. I'll take my spring-loaded magazine and load each cartridge, pushing it back all the way and making sure it's properly seated in place. I'll take the firearm, keeping it in a safe direction, finger off the trigger, push the spring-loaded magazine up into the firearm, pull the slide back, release it. The firearm is now ready to operate. And now I'll demonstrate unloading the firearm. You'll operate the magazine release, placing the magazine down. You'll bring the slide back, which will eject the cartridge. You'll visually inspect the firearm to make sure that there's no more rounds inside. And it's ready for transportation or storage. It's important to remember that with this particular model, the slide will not lock back into place unless there's an empty magazine in the magazine well. It's also important to remember that before working the slide to unload the firearm, you need to drop the magazine first.